So this is Group U2's cost benefit analysis review. The proposed project for the cost benefit analysis we did was the City University of New York's Accelerated Study and Associate Programs, which is just it's a program that ensures that students graduate in 3 years, and it makes them take a full-time course load and offers them all kinds of resources to be able to graduate with their associates, and it's for lower income people. And this is just a quote from the report. It's although ASAP requires more resources per student than the traditional associate program, the cost per graduate was found to be lower because it's much higher effectiveness in producing graduates, which is basically just saying that although like the price tag is higher than a typical associate's degree program at a community college, it's the net benefits are actually higher because of all the different ways that students and taxpayers benefit from this program. And the costs and benefits evaluated in this paper had a large emphasis on the taxpayer. And the decision maker or group for this report was either the City University of New York, which hosts the program, so it could be trying to convince them to keep the program, or taxpayers, since that's kind of the people they're trying to prove gain net benefits from it, but it doesn't really have like an explicit decision maker in the report. And so the benefits of the project, in my view, would be a more educated population, which is just good in general to have, and there'd be few people on welfare and fewer people in prison, which means that we're not paying for them with tax dollars, and it's also just good for those people to not be in welfare and on welfare and in prison. And graduates will be able to attain better jobs, which is just good in and of itself, but it also means they will be in a higher tax bracket, so the city will earn more tax dollars to be able to continue the program and do all kinds of things with that money, and higher quality of life for graduates and their families because of the higher income, lower crime rates, and more affordable and easily accessible option for college, which is really good because I think it's basically free. And there's they'll have better access to healthcare because they'll have access to jobs that have healthcare included, and I believe benefits a cure to society as a whole because everyone benefits from these things. Taxpayers is basically everyone, so I think everyone benefits from this program.
And so in the CBA paper, the author listed a lot of the same benefits that we just went over. They just looked at it in two separate groups. Then those groups would be the students, and from the perspective of the New York City taxpayers. So for the students, the main benefit that I looked at and they analyzed was the difference in lifetime earnings of someone with a high school degree versus someone with an associate degree. And so they used income data from the ACS from 2008 to 2010, and were able to discount it back to the present day for the paper, which was $2010. By doing so, they figured out that on average, an associate degree earns around $320,000 more over their lifetime, which is definitely a benefit there. And then we're looking at New York City taxpayers. Like we just said in the previous slide, there's a bunch of benefits that come from having a more educated population and living in that population. And so some of those that they listed out were increased tax revenues, which makes up around 80% of the total $200,000 benefit per associate degree. And the last 20% is made up of a few other things, such as savings from public health expenditures, savings on welfare and public assistance programs, and savings in the criminal justice areas of public expenditure. So then moving on to the costs of ASAP. So as a team, we looked at it again in those two distinct groups, students and New York City taxpayers. The way we looked at it for students was that there's really three main areas or components of the costs that they bear. The first is tuition, which is the most obvious. After that would be education materials like textbooks, any special things they have to buy for specific classes, or transportation to the school. And the last one would be foregone earnings. And so this would basically be if they were employed for those 3 years they are in school instead of going to school, the cumulative number or the cumulative income they would earn those 3 years. In terms of the costs for the New York City taxpayers, the big one here would be the institutional cost of running this university, the CUNY, because it is a public university. The taxpayers do pay for it. So then moving on to what the CBA listed as the costs, once again, very similar to what we thought were the costs of ASAP. Here they looked at for the students, those three areas. So the tuition on average for the regular program versus the ASAP program, the foregone earnings of both of those programs, as well as textbook and transportation. The important thing to note here is that for ASAP, a large part of your tuition is covered through financial aid, even though it is a bit higher. And then textbooks and transportation are also all covered by ASAP as well. And then when we looked at costs for the New York City taxpayers, the traditional program is around $66,000 per graduate, whereas the ASAP is a bit cheaper at $59,000 per graduate. So in terms of savings in the cost area, if you do the ASAP program, it is definitely cheaper for both students as well as taxpayers.
The impacts of the costs and benefits of the ASAP program extend to many different markets, having different effects on different markets. As felt by the taxpayers, the main costs are reflected in the supply and demand for different products in markets such as the wholesale and e-commerce markets. The demand decreases for normal goods due to the wealth effect, which says that the less wealth you have, the less normal goods you're going to be demanding to buy. And the supply will then soon follow, with the prices also decreasing during this time. This decrease in demand lowers producer surplus. The benefits, as felt by the taxpayer, are just gains from overall improvements in the productivity in the labor market. Just the overall increase in better technology and higher productivity leads to increased efficiency. And then in many cases and many markets, this increased efficiency will lead to more competition, which increases the wages for skilled workers. The costs and benefits as felt by the participating students. The students take on less costs than the normal program, since the taxpayers actually end up taking on the burden of most of what they pay through scholarships and subsidies. So these costs are once again through the taxpayers seen in wholesale and e-commerce markets, where the producer surplus ends up declining as a result of demand. And then there's also costs of foregone earnings, since these students could have held full-time jobs during this time. And these costs can be reflected in the lack of supply of unskilled laborers in the labor market, and overall a decrease in consumption, since these students aren't gaining the same amount of money that they would be to spend if they were not in the program. The benefits, as felt by participating students, the higher education leads to them being able to work more efficiently in the labor market, making them skilled laborers, which they will then end up gaining higher wages due to cheaper production for their companies and the overall rising demand relative to, or for skilled laborers relative to unskilled laborers in the United States. The input market also would face overall just cheaper inputs, since labor is seen as an input in the input market, which ends up increasing producer surplus, since they can charge the same amount for products but at a cheaper price. The increases in the skilled labor employment would, in the job market, there would also be increases in the skilled labor employment, which may decrease unskilled employment in some cases, but many times unskilled employment opportunities are needed in a market or an economy. Finally, there are costs and benefits felt by the government, seen as major savings in different markets. As you can see in this figure, different markets such as healthcare and criminal justice end up saving a lot of money due to more educated and productive citizens.
So to improve the CBA, I would do three things. First, I would address externalities better. So as you know, education has a long reach. They address tax, health, and crime and how it would affect that, but there are longer effects that I think could have been addressed. Next are opportunity costs. So they did describe the direct costs, but I think they could have done a better job of describing the next best option and what they were giving up. And then third, the writers of the CBA, I believe, were in favor of the ASAP program, and I think they could have been more objective and gave more evidence on maybe why it's not such a good thing. Next slide. So I do believe that this paper is persuasive and likely to influence the decision group. There's lots of data-backed evidence in this. They have monetary values assigned to the evidence, and they have cited the studies where they got this. They directly address the stakeholders who this is going to influence. They're addressing how it will affect taxpayers and how it will affect the students. And then thirdly, despite what I said in the last slide, they do provide counter evidence. They do acknowledge that it is initially more expensive, and they address why that is okay. Next slide. So I would advise the decision maker to accept this project. First, it increases tax revenue. That's going to lead to more money that can be spent in the economy. It's going to have, well, originally, there's more tax revenue because the people are going to be making more. This is going to lead to a more advanced economy, and that's just good for everyone. There's going to be less crime. More educated people commit less crime. There's going to be less theft, more efficiency, and less tax money spent on criminal justice. And finally, the citizens are going to be healthier. More educated citizens are healthier. First and foremost, they're going to be happier. If you're healthy, you tend to be happier. There's less tax money spent on healthcare, and the citizens can work longer, which leads to a more productive society. And that is everything. Thanks for listening to our lecture.